Today, I want to offer you a parable. This is an ancient parable, one of my favorites that I speak about often. It's short, but it's extremely thought provoking, and if you let it, it will follow you through the week. This story has been used to show how various religious and spiritual traditions are pointing to one great truth. It's one of my favorites because it gently dismantles the illusion that we've got it all figured out. By the end of this episode, you may find yourself seeing your own beliefs and the beliefs of others with new eyes, not as contradictions, but as sacred pieces of something much larger, something we're all touching, even if we call it by different names. This parable is about the blind men and the elephant. There was once a group of blind men who had never seen, never heard of, or never even imagined an elephant. No stories, no symbols, just pure unfamiliarity. So one day, each of these blind men were invited to touch this mysterious thing called an elephant, hoping to understand what it was. The man at the leg ran his hands down the elephant's sturdy column and declared, the elephant's like a tree. The blind man at the tail shook his head, gripping the coarse end of the elephant, and he said, no, an elephant is clearly a rope. Another, feeling the sharp curve of the tusk, insisted, you're both wrong. An elephant is like a spear. The man at the ear, brushing against the elephant's wide flapping surface, said, none of that makes any sense. It's obviously like a fan. And the one touching the broad side of the elephant stood firm and said, you are all mistaken. The elephant is like a wall. Each man was convinced his truth was the truth. None could fathom how the other's experience could be so radically different from their own. And yet they were all touching the same thing, an elephant, just from different angles. Throughout all my studies of ancient spiritual texts and sacred scriptures, I have come to believe we are all touching a different part of the same eternal truth. As I immerse myself in the diverse language of religion and spirituality, I consistently encounter echoes of the perennial philosophy in all spiritual and religious thoughts. The perennial philosophy is the idea that beneath the surface differences of the world's spiritual traditions lies a shared universal truth. It suggests that all religions, when stripped of their cultural and historical layers, point towards the same metaphysical reality, a divine source, a transcendent unity, and a path towards inner realization. I think us earthlings have at times gotten caught up in touching our piece of the elephant and believing our experience is the only truth. We don't often acknowledge or appreciate that each person's experience is just a different facet of the same higher power, or whatever we choose to call that higher power. We're each blind in our own way, not because we lack insight, but because the fullness of higher power or God is too vast, too multidimensional, too alive to be grasped by any one tradition, doctrine, or personal experience. And yet we often mistake our piece of the elephant for the whole. We cling to our spiritual revelations, our sacred text, our mystical encounters, and we say, this is what God is. But what if someone else standing in a different place, touching a different part of the divine, says something entirely different? Are they wrong? Or are they simply tuned to a different frequency of the same sacred resonance? This parable invites us to kind of loosen our grip on certainty. I once heard someone speak about the sin of certainty, not in a religious sense, but in the original meaning of the word sin, which comes from archery, archery. Sin is an archery term meaning to miss the mark. This image stayed with me. When I'm too far over here, too rigid in my knowing, I miss the center. I miss the mark. Certainty, when held too tightly, can crowd out faith, because faith isn't an absence of doubt, right? It's what rises in its presence, in doubt's presence. A little doubt leaves room for mystery, for surrender, for trust in what we cannot fully grasp. This isn't spiritual weakness, it's spiritual maturity. Even our most revered teachers have walked through the valley of uncertainty, as we see in Jesus crying out in the ninth hour, my God, why have you forsaken me? That moment wasn't a collapse of faith. It was the raw human edge of it, the place where faith is forged. So when we encounter someone whose truth feels different from ours, maybe we don't need to defend our certainty. Maybe I can listen and wonder and remember that we're all just trying to touch the elephant. And none of us have the whole picture. When we begin to see that each person's experience is a facet of the same spiritual reality, we stop feeling threatened by differences. We can start recognizing the beauty in diversity. I start recognizing the beauty in diversity. The person who sees God as a roaring fire is not in conflict with the one who feels God as a still, soft, quiet stream. Some experience the divine through a distinctly masculine lens. Others feel a deeply feminine presence. And others perceive both the masculine and the feminine equally within God. And then there are others who perceive God as beyond gender altogether, fluid and non binary in essence. But it doesn't matter. They are all touching the elephant, they are all in contact with the sacred. In this way, spiritual navigation becomes less about arriving at a singular truth and more about honoring the mosaic of truths that make up the divine. It's not relativism, it's reverence. It's the humility to say, I know what I've touched and I trust what you've touched too. This is the essence of sacred resonance, the ability to hold space for multiple truths without collapsing into confusion or division. With that being said, I am aware that there are people who respond to differing beliefs with judgment and condemnation. I've encountered that behavior before and it is real. But that's a separate conversation from this one that deserves its own space and depth. For now, I want to stay within the heart of this message in this video, the beauty of spiritual diversity and the expansion that comes when we honor each other's experience of the divine. Here's what I've come to realize. When I surround myself with people who are touching a different part of the elephant that is God, something profound happens. My understanding doesn't just shift, it expands. Their experience, their language, their intimate encounters with the divine stretch the edges of my own perception. Simply hearing how someone else feels, thinks, and communes with their higher power invites me into a broader, more nuanced relationship with the sacred. It's not about agreement, it's about expansion. Their truth doesn't threaten my truth. Oftentimes it can enrich it, and it does. Even when I do not share the same perspective, I can listen to you while recognizing this does not resonate with me, while still gaining insight and expansion. And in that exchange, my conception of God becomes more whole, more alive, more infinite. So, as we journey deeper in our own spiritual paths, I invite us all to remember the elephant, because together we form a fuller picture of the divine than any one of us could possibly do alone. Have a good week.